code and informational items. Presentation of superintendent's proposed FY25 budget.
All right, thank you all very much for your patience this evening. What we're going to do is walk you through tonight our proposed budget, and at the end, we'll talk about timeline in terms of next steps. So we're just going to go right at it, and you all have a copy of it. It's on your computers or obviously up there. But just as we start every year with our budget, we just remind ourselves what our most important why is, and it's our kids, first and foremost. So every decision that we make is from the lens of what's best for students, and that's how we move through the process, and how we allocate funds is always in what's in the best interest of kids. Excuse me, this information we went over at our board meeting on Thursday. We talked through the entire enrollment process and how we come up with our ADM number for 2025. Excuse me. So we are moving forward with 2880 for this coming school year. Wonderful. Excuse me. So in terms of budget priorities, we also talked about this at our last meeting. And our main one is to support recruitment and retention of qualified educators, leaders, and support staff. And we do that by providing an increased compensation for all staff and salary scale adjustments. And what we're going to do tonight is actually walk through every single one of these and talk about the funding that's required for those. Student and teacher support in the areas of mental health and behaviors. That's that student mental health support staff position. It will be an in-person position. We want to be clear with that. It would not be a virtual or a remote position. And it could be in the form of something like a school social worker or a therapist. It will depend on what person we can get in an actual body on site for that. In terms of instructional support, some of those positions listed are required because of SOQ numbers. Others are ones that we really want to add to our programming, so we've prioritized those. Organizational management and safety. We've talked in the past about the data systems specialist position for oversight of Power School. And we also discussed the DCJS grant opportunity for the division safety officer. In terms of facilities and maintenance and upgrade, you're going to see that there's information about just the normal year-to-year upkeep, maintenance, and management and upgrade of facilities and operations. And there is an increase to the operations and maintenance budget that we've included this year based on an analysis that we've done that there's extra funding that's needed in that area. And then we're always looking to expand the Career and Technical Education Center. Some of that will come as part of our secondary piece, which is the facilities and capital improvements. In terms of compensation, we're going to start there tonight. So in the governor's budget, if you recall, just a quick recap of where we are budget-wise, what has been proposed in his December budget was a 1% bonus for all SOQ funded positions for FY25. That will require a local match. And that, again, that bonus is a one-time bonus for staff. In FY26, the second year of the biennium, there's a 2% increase proposed. And again, that would also require a local match because just as a reminder, 68% of 67% of our positions are SOQ funded. So roughly 47% of the total would need to come from the locale. And there was a loss in terms of the initial budget. There was a loss of that compensation supplement. So right now, the only money that's earmarked for any compensation as of right now is the 1% bonus and the 2% increase in FY26. We are proposing something a little bit different. We are doing this, again, in order to support, recruit, and retain highly qualified educators, leaders, and support staff. We are, with this budget, recommending an average 4% salary increase plus a step. And that does come with a heavy price tag, but it's $1.2 million. And that would be 4% in the step for everyone across the division, all positions. And that the rationale for that is in order to just remain competitive across the region, we have to continue to offer compensation increases that exceed other school divisions. Otherwise, they're going to give one, we're going to give one. We're just going to stay in the same position we're in. In terms of classified scale adjustments, I want to walk you through a little bit of history. So in FY23, we did the first step of adjusting the classified scale, and that's where we unbanded steps. And what that means is previously you could have gone maybe from step 5, 6, and 7, and they all would have made the same amount of money. So they were banded together. So that meant even if somebody was moved up a step, they received no increase because the amount was the same. So Ms. Seacrest did a lot of work. She unbanded all of those steps. We increased our minimum wage, and all of that came at a cost of $477,000. And then after those adjustments were made, there was a 7% compensation increase, which was a 6% salary increase plus a step. So that came after the unbanding for steps. So that was FY23. FY24, last year, we took those unbanded steps and we just added additional funding across each of those steps. And that came at a cost of $208,000. And then on top of that was the additional 5%. So everyone on the classified scale has seen over the last 2 years a 12%. So it's those salary increases plus the steps. We've been very intentional to keep the steps. So this year, what we're proposing is the third step in this process of these classified scale adjustments. It's again adding compensation to identified positions to increase the overall wages, making them more competitive locally. If you guys recall, a couple weeks ago, Dr. Johnson shared that regional analysis, and it showed where we sit right now in each of those positions, and some of them were 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 9. We've got to get those positions more competitive, otherwise we are going to continue to lose staff because they can either go somewhere else and make more money, or they can go into the regular work world and make more money. We are also proposing an adjustment of the minimum wage from $12 where it is now to $15, which is where it will be required in FY26. So we're going to recommend biting that chunk right now and just get there. The required change of January 2025 is $13.50, and then 2026 is the $15. So this proposal moves those positions to the $15. And so we wouldn't have to make next year another minimum wage adjustment. We're going to have to make that. So do we want to do it now, or do we want to parse it out? We're recommending to just go ahead and make it. It makes us more competitive at $15 an hour for some positions, and it will move us ahead, we think, in the region as well. That does also come with a pretty substantial price tag of $965,000. Once those adjustments are made to that salary scale, you then will add the 4% and the step to that for those classified staff members. And that would be all staff members, not just those currently identified to have this additional step adjustment. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So this is what it looks like, and these are the positions in FY26, So currently our bookkeepers are 10th out of 10 in the region, meaning they have the lowest salary of bookkeepers out of our 10 comparison schools in the region. School secretaries are 8 out of 10 at step 0. Custodians are 8 out of 9, and the reason why it's 9 there instead of 10 is there is a school division that outsources their custodial services, so they don't match the salary scales. It's a vendor, not a school division. Instructional assistants are sitting at 6 out of 10. So those 4 classified areas are where we're proposing in FY25 to make those salary scale adjustments. Food service will also do that this year. Remember that their budget is entirely separate of our Fund 1. So we'll show you some numbers for them, but that budget's totally separate. So when you see our final numbers, it does not include her food service staff. Maintenance and bus drivers, we would then, because bus drivers are already at 4 out of 9, which is where we're trying to get, is we want bookkeepers, school secretaries, custodians, and instructional assistants. We want to get them to 4th out of 9. These changes will do that. Bus drivers are there, so they'll get the raise, the compensation increase, and then next year we'll look at where we are and we'll move them if we need to move them up. But right now they're where we want to be.
At what point would you like questions at the end?
Anytime. You're
Okay.
fine. No.
So you open the door and I have to ask, what does a vendor cost?
For custodial services, I don't know. I have to get that number. But typically they're a little more expensive than what we would pay in-house. What you get there is different. They do all the hiring and the staffing of it, and they do the oversight. But typically they run a little bit more expensive than what we pay in the school.
Mr. Painter said this is a good chart. Ranking our pay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Payne. You want to add anything to that? We can get you that information.
No, I'm just curious. I mean, I understand that they may be a little higher, but does that also include all of their HR benefits and so forth? I mean,
Typically,
Yeah,
because
so-
those folks would become their employees. They would no
Correct.
longer be school division employees.
so from that regard, though, would that reduce our overall costs? I am seeing some no's, all right.
Yeah, so it would reduce our costs, but the vendor cost is usually higher than what ours
Then,
would be
okay,
reduced.
all right.
So we might lose some folks in our health thing, but we
Right.
might pay more because they're charging us, they would charge us ultimately for their health care through their benefit program.
Okay. And I wanted to go back to the salary, the 4% that we're talking about. I just thought, speaking of trying to keep people on board here in Page County, thought it was noteworthy that the Shenandoah County, I believe, they're coming in this year at 3.5%. So if we're going to keep people here from going to Shenandoah or other counties, we're going to have that 4%.
Right now, what's on the table for most in our region is between a 3 and a 4. There's one division that's coming in at 1% because that's just where they are financially. Most are sitting at 3 and 4% and are waiting to see what the budget is going to do. So yes, in order for us, if we want to get to 4 in the region, we've got to do this and then do more. But this will at least get us, if we do a little bit more than them. If we only go in at a 3.5, we're going to stay where we are, right?
And the other key point, I think, is that this is going to last for the 2 years.
That
Right.
piece with the minimum wage, yeah, will
Right.
get us through the next 2 years.
Okay.
And we haven't been told that there's another minimum wage increase on the horizon. You know, that may come, but right now 15 was the mark.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, feel free to ask questions anytime. All right, so classified, this would be then the step 4, would be next for fiscal year 26. We would add additional compensation for those additional positions that weren't in FY 23 or 24. Adjust for the minimum wage if we have to for any remaining positions that might need that. And then the total cost of that would just be dependent on where we are next year, how many employees that are at those different places. So that cost would have to be determined. And then again, on top of that, we've typically done the compensation increase. So I don't know what we're going to recommend for FY 26 yet. That would be to be determined, but that's the next step in this process. So I want to make sure you all are aware there is another step, make sure staff know there's another step coming for those employees that may not be on this year's adjustment. Okay? So all of that together, if you take the 4% in the step for all staff, and you take the classified scale adjustments that we're recommending, you're looking at a total of $2.2 million. So that's one piece. Remember that number. We're going to throw all these pieces together as we get further into this. So that's one piece just for the compensation adjustments. Any questions there? All right, so now let's take a look at some of the projected expenditures as we move through. And this is where we're going to talk about some of those staffing needs and requests that we've been touching on over the last couple of weeks. So the first one is an English language learner teacher. That's one full-time employee. And the rationale for that is in order to support English language students due to an increase in the number of students across the division, we're going to need another teacher. So our standards of quality require right now one teacher for every 50 students. We're currently sitting at about 49 students. We anticipate that going over 50. So rather than be on the back end and in August coming and saying we need another teacher, we want to try and get on the front end. Special education teacher, again, there's ratios that are required there. Right now, we're up about 50, about 20 students, if not more. So that's also going to require some additional staffing for special education. Student mental health support position, I talked about this just a minute ago, but that's going to be something in the area of a therapist or a social worker that can be utilized across the schools. And we'll wait and see which one that can be based on who we can get in person to support that position. Reading specialists are going to be required at the middle school level through the Virginia Literacy Act. That will begin in the fall of 2025. But again, we're bringing it now because we'd like to get in front of that as well. That way we could potentially get those staff members in for a year, get them settled, get them trained. There's a lot to the Virginia Literacy Act. Mrs. Ryman is working through our literacy plan. There's so many pieces to it. Having them on board early would be a wonderful benefit. There is potentially through the Senate budget, potentially some funding for these positions, but right now we're going to conclude it in our priority list. And I have an asterisk to show you that if funding comes through for that, we're going to replace that position with another one. Student support monitors.
Who would we replace, or what would we replace?
I'll show you in just a minute.
Okay.
Yep. Student support monitors and attendance support instructional assistants at the elementary schools. Those folks are currently in place right now. They're being funded through our ESSER grant, which expires at the end of June. We'd like to be able to continue those positions in support of our elementary schools. So that's on our list as well. School counselor at the Alternative Education Center. Currently, we do not have a counselor there. Given that that program is growing and expanding as well, we are recommending that we put a counselor there in support of those students and staff. Technology data specialist, that's the Power School position that we've been talking about, and currently now Mr. Samples does that in conjunction with his other work. We are recommending that that be its own position, just given the level of work and the number of reports that are required with that. Based on some analysis that's been done, an additional maintenance staff member is being recommended in this budget. A division safety officer position, that's the Department of Criminal Justice position that's grant funded. So we've submitted that grant in conjunction with the county. And initially they'll pay about a third of the cost of that. So when you see the numbers, that'll reflect that. Over a course of 3 years, we have to then find full funding for that position. We've put in an additional teacher because we know at the high school, there's a possibility at one of our high schools, we're going to need some additional elective options. So in order to have that, we need the funding for the teacher for that position. And then cafeteria monitors would be at all of our schools, and that's just providing supervision and support during lunch. It's a part-time position, a few hours a day that we would hire. And again, just to provide that extra supervision during lunchtime at the schools. Any questions about those positions?
Go back to the division safety officer position. You said, okay, it's on a grant, but the grant doesn't pay fully, does it? It's only 67% or something of that nature?
Yeah, so there's a local match required, so the grant will pay the about 67% of it, and then the county will have to have a local match to pay the remainder.
Okay.
And then after I believe it's a 3-year, after that 3rd year, the county would have to pick up the full cost of it, unless the state comes up with other grant opportunities for it. It's very similar to the same process for SROs.
Right.
So same thing there. We pay part of it initially, and then at the end of the grant, the county has to pick up the full cost of it. So all of those positions, if we were to go to the Board of Supervisors and we would say, we want all of these positions, we'd love it. Now, we need all of these because we could certainly use these positions. You're looking at a total of $922,000. And so obviously we know, given where we are with the compensation that we're asking, the salary scale adjustments, we know that we can't necessarily go and request all of those. We're going to make them aware of all of these positions and the requests, but what we've done is prioritize that so that we feel like we can go to them with a reasonable request in terms of staffing positions. So where we've left it right now, and so Mr. Overfelt, this will answer your question, because the English language and the special education are often tied to requirements, SOQ things, those two are sort of non-negotiable requirements for us to move forward. So those are up in the top priority. Student mental health support position, we all know how critical that is right now with everything that's going on. So that position will be there. And then as a fourth that we want to carry over in a request are the 2 reading specialists at the middle school. And so that asterisk there is that the Senate budget may have some funding for that. So if that does come through, what we would like to do, and we'll make this known up front to the Board of Supervisors, is take that $140,000 request and replace it with the next items on our priority list, which would be the school counselor at the Alternative Ed Center and student support monitor positions. So we'd look to replace those.
If we get that extra, if the money comes through, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So now we Paul ranked these positions, is that chart gonna come up, or are you gonna?
I wasn't putting it in this presentation. I can share it with you guys.
I'd be interested to see how that came out across the board.
I'll send it to you. It's in an Excel, and what we did was we averaged it for you all as a group, for us as a group, and then for everybody as a group.
Were we close? or-
Yeah, pretty close, actually. Mhm. All right, so in addition, so you've seen compensation increases, the 2.2 million. You've seen now the staffing needs and requests. We're going to go in with 355,000 there for those 5 positions. The other piece of our expenditures that just sort of are reoccurring costs every year, and they just continue to rise. So the one is our health insurance. And right now, for the purposes of the budget, we estimate a 10% increase. So that's around $470,000. Utilities and contracts each year go up, so we also do an estimate there of a 10% increase. So that's $172,000. Right now, the Shenandoah Valley Regional Program, they have estimated an increase in funding there. You'll see there's asterisks, and there's a lot of asterisks in this presentation, so sorry about that, but there's always little nuances to the numbers. Right now, the governor's FY25 proposed budget actually had a decrease for us in regional programming. So that's why you're seeing that big number there. Typically, we get a little bit of an increase each year in that funding. So having a decrease is one thing. The other is Title 6B through special ed. Sometimes some of that funding can be applied to the regional program. We don't know that yet. We don't have those numbers yet. Those allocations haven't come out. So there's a possibility that maybe through the Senate and the House versions, there's some extra funding there. And then maybe through Title 6B, we may not have that cost or that much of that cost. But again, it's just an unknown, so we put it in at the higher end right now because if worst case is we need that funding to be able to continue with regional programs.
With the KEYS program, if that gets started, will that alleviate any need at all from the regional program?
Some, because what it'll do is it'll pull potentially some of those resources may not need to be at the regional program, but the money will still have to go to KEYS. So you're sort of balancing it out a little bit. The funding will still need to be there.
But we're going to take the cost of the keys and balance that against what we're paying currently to send folks over, and then maybe we might have a savings.
Potentially.
Okay,
Our savings would definitely be in transport.
correct.
And will students from other counties, if they come into the KEYS program, they have to pay their fee?
They do.
But we don't get any.
Right. The only revenue we're going to make off of KEYS Academy is the rent from the lease.
Yeah.
Because they're private, so any
Right.
revenue that they make from tuition goes to them.
And if we continue to get that lease with them, we're going to look at, hopefully we're going to look at the maintenance and taxes and so forth, that they will take
Potentially.
care of that.
Potentially. I think there are limits to what we can do because it's considered a school.
Right.
And we don't pay anything.
Well, true,
Property.
but the
Yeah,
maintenance
but-
issues.
Yeah, so we'll definitely look at square footage. Dr. Johnson works up the square footage and all of that sort of stuff, and the utilities and all of that to make sure that we're not going in the hole.
Right.
But that work.
And I apologize if this is out of the realm here, but when we had that presentation on the school, there were buildings, there were rooms, 10 rooms that are not being used. Is there a plan to use those rooms?
Possibly. That may be we talked a little bit about the possibility of expanding with KEYS Academy for an alternative education program.
Okay,
That may or may not work there, but it might be that we find another organization or another group that might be able to use that space. It would take conversations with KEYS Academy because they do have some pretty prescriptive things and rules they have to follow.
right.
And also with the Bible Holiness, we would make sure we engage in conversation so we don't disrupt their leases that they have.
Sure. I was just thinking that maybe some of the programs that we do at the tech center right now could move there. That would,
Possibly. We don't have any administrators on site there.
right.
So if we'd move, say, a class or two there, we'd also have to bring over some type of administrative support.
Right.
But it's possible. We can always look at it. I think now that we've got KEYS coming in, Bible Holiness wants to stay there. I think we have a really viable way to use that building, so we'll continue to look and see if we can use the additional space in other ways.
Good news story.
Okay, and then the last one on here is this operations and maintenance budget adjustment. So Mrs. Seacrest has been looking at budgets, and we've been underfunded in that area. And just the cost of everything is going up. The age of our buildings is going up. We think it's prudent right now to increase that budget line item. So that request is there. We will come back in FY26 with some more because we need more than that. But we've got to build up that budget because costs for things are just skyrocketing, and the age of our buildings is starting to catch up with us.
So I hate to keep talking. So have we done any work yet with looking at creating efficiencies with the county?
We have a meeting tomorrow morning.
Okay, good.
So Dr. Johnson, myself, and their procurement officer down there and their budget.
Okay, good, thank you. And I just want to point out too that we were at the governor's school. The other counties are also looking at a 10% health insurance cost. So we're not out of the ballpark here.
Unfortunately, no. I think everybody saw a little bit of relief post-COVID because people couldn't and weren't going to, but now it's catching up with us, unfortunately. And it's not a cheap expenditure.
No, unfortunately.
And just so that you all know, that cost right now, we're not recommending that any of that increase be carried to the employee. We're absorbing that as a division. All right, so in terms of summary of projected expenditures, so please don't have a coronary with the number, but right now with the compensation adjustments, the staffing needs and requests, and then the additional costs, you're looking at $3.8 million. So that's the number we're going to carry forward, and we'll show you in a few minutes how that comes out with the governor's proposed with the House and the Senate. Any questions there? Now, in terms of revenue, what are we going to be bringing in to kind of counter some of that request? So revenue sources, your funding for schools comes primarily from three places: from the state, Commonwealth of Virginia, from our local board, so the Board of Supervisors, the County of Page, and then the federal government and some other miscellaneous sources. And you can see, based on FY24, our Fund 1, so remember, I'm going to tell you in a minute those different funds, but Fund 1 is our primary operating. That's where pretty much everything is. For that, in FY24, you can see that the state gave us 63% of our funding. Our locality provided 27% of the funding. The federal government was 9%, and then other was 1%. And those funds are allocated in three different places. So Fund 1, again, is our operating budget. Just whenever you hear us talking about budget, I would tell you go to Fund 1. That's primarily where everything is. Fund 2 is capital improvements. And right now, the capital improvements that we talk about is only state and federal funding. There is no local funding right now for capital improvements. We're going to make some recommendations down the road that will change that and hopefully be accepted. But right now, it's just state and federal money in that account. And then Fund 5 is the nutritional services account. And that runs on its own account. She gets a little bit of state money. We'll show you that. And then that's a separate line item. So for us, everything primarily that we're going to talk about moving forward is related to Fund 1. Okay. So in terms of state projected funding, as of right now, and all of this is based on the proposed budget from the governor in December 2023. So you can see that there is a slight increase overall of $325,000. We're asking for 3.8 million, and we get 325,000 from the state. So that the rest of that has to come from the locality.
So 3.5.
So right now, this is where we are, and I'll show you in just a minute the differences with the House and the Senate budget. In terms of local funding, what we do right now at this point for a proposed budget, because our next step will be now to go and make an official request with the Board of Supervisors. For right now, we leave that funding as level funding. We don't add in anything till we get a little bit further down the budget process. So you're going to see that number just stay flat. Our hope is that they never go in the negative direction and take money away. Our hope is that they'll work with us and honor some of the requests that we're asking. So as we begin to move further down the process, hopefully that number will go up. And we'll reflect that in different budget amendments for. And then federal funding. Don't be alarmed. You're going to see some red in the next couple of slides. It's okay. Take a breath. A lot of what you're going to see from the decreases is because we're losing the majority of our pandemic funding. So that's why you're seeing that negative there. But we saw a plus and an increase over the last couple of years. All of that gets wrapped into that federal line. All of that now is starting to go away. So you're going to see it decrease. So we don't have some numbers, and I'll show you what those other federal accounts are. We don't get those numbers yet until a little bit later. Those allocations will start coming out in the spring. But so don't panic because you see red. It's okay. So some of our continuing fund one federal funding are things like Title I. You've heard us refer to that quite a bit. Those are funds allocated to improving academic achievement and for disadvantaged students. Title II, Title III, Title IV, Title VI-B, which I mentioned earlier for special education, and then the Perkins Grant, which is money that we get for career and technical education. So you'll see Mr. Hopkins will come and he's going to start presenting to you in the spring. Each year we have to submit applications for that. We get an allotment from the state sends the federal allotment because they get a big old chunk for the state, and then they break it down by school division. He will take those, he rewrites our applications, we submit those. So he'll start coming before you and presenting information related to those applications for each year. So we don't know those exact numbers right now, what Ms. Seacrest does. So that number that you saw here, the FY25 projected, that's just taking our number where we are this year and we carry it over into our projected. Those should go up. Ideally, every year we get a little bit more and a little bit more from federal. So that number hopefully will also increase, and we're still going to show that negative because of the removal of those pandemic funds, but we'll show you the difference from year to year with each of those titles. And then these are the expiring or have already expired federal pandemic funding accounts. So you can see there over the past few years, there's been a great influx of money to the division and totaling around $11 million in all of those different fund accounts. Most are getting ready to expire, the last few in this June. Some have already expired and are done and finished and tabled out. What we will do for you in March is we're going to come back and we'll provide you with a list of each of those and what was bought and spent from those accounts, so you have a sense of how that money was spent across the division. All right, in terms of revenue estimates for Fund 1, so from each of those funding sources, from the state, you see the 27 million there. And I want to note to you that amount that we're projecting there is based on the 2880 ADM. So that's that number based on enrollment. So if the governor's budget were to hold true today, and that's what we had to work with, we would see $27,000 or $27 million from the state. So that's an increase of $325,000. The federal, you see the decrease there. Other, we leave that static. That's things like rent,
Auction items, facility use, donations, kind of the catch-all of the other types of.
Golf carts and pickup truck.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And then you see the local, again, that remains the same. We keep that as flat funding. Hopefully that number will go up as well. So you can see overall from last year to this year, there's a $1.4 million decrease. And again, I'm going to remind you, take a breath. That's because of that loss of funding in pandemic. So if you take that out of the equation, we're at a plus 325,000 right from all of that. And that's without requesting any funding from the locale. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. So in terms of proposed budget amendments, so crossover Sunday has happened. Right now, my understanding is that both the other houses have approved each other's budget, which is really good news, because that didn't happen last year until April, May, somewhere in there. So that's really good news that they've approved each other's. That's a good step forward. So what this slide just shows you is what does it mean if those were the budgets that then got sent back to the governor for approval? So you see the governor's proposed there's that 27 million, and that's based on that 28 as Actually, in this slide, we use the 2816. Thank you. So this slide, just a little nuance here. When the calc tool that Mrs. Sechrist uses, when we get it initially from the state puts in a number to use for enrollment. The number that they're using is 2816. It's just a holding place. They put a number in. We can adjust that. We can make that number whatever we want it to be. That's that whole enrollment piece that we talked about. So our number that we're going to be using is 2880. This slide, because the House and the Senate calculation tools haven't come out yet for us to go put our number in and see what the funding would be, this slide shows you the 2816 number. So this should go up, these numbers, because we're going to add additional enrollment, which means additional funds will come. But just for the purpose to make this slide, so we're talking apples to apples, the governor's number is the 2816. That makes sense. I know it's complicated. So the House is projecting 28 million coming our way. And you can see that over and above the governor's proposed, that would be an increase of $1.2 million in funding. Yay, House. Senate is looking a lot better. It's an increase of $1.6 million. So does that slide make sense in terms of where we're going? So we're optimistic that there'll be an increase to funding.
Hopefully they'll bounce in the middle maybe.
And again, those two, the 1.2 and the 1.6, that will go up because we're going to move from 2816 to 28.8.
Mr. Painter join again? He left a little while ago. He said the meeting ended for him,
But he was happy with what he saw.
but he was happy with what he saw.
It's in Puerto Rico.
Right. Okay. Sorry.
Oh, he's in Puerto Rico. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
And we are not.
Right. He gets a gold star for even joining.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Mrs. Painter. All right, so Fund 2. So that was all Fund 1. So Fund 2 is our capital improvements. And right now, again, you're going to see this number. You're seeing that big red decrease because that's a loss of federal funding due to the pandemic. It's also a loss of the state construction money, about $1.8 million, if you recall. 2 years ago was allocated to the division, so that gets added into that Fund 2 amount. That money's been spent. It isn't being replaced. There is no school construction money in either the governor's budget, the House, or the Senate. So that's why you're seeing that big decrease. So again, I'm going to say don't panic. And I know you're going to look at me and say, but it's a big red number. But it's okay. It's because that money is no longer there. It doesn't mean that we're in the hole $2.2 million.
Do we know the reasoning as to why there's no funding?
I mean, back in 2008, 2009, during the recession, that took a hit. It used to be every year, every state budget had an allocation for school construction funding. In the recession, it took a hit. It just never got put back in until 2 years ago. And we were absolutely ecstatic when they put it in because it brought $1.8 million. And we'll show you how that money has been used. There's some great things that have come from that across the division. We're sad that there's not another amount, but right now, you know, maybe the governor will come back and add something because he can add another piece to his, but I'm not too optimistic that there'll be anything added because it isn't at this point.
Just to clarify, weren't we told that it was well over half of schools in the state are over like 50 years?
50 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's Fund 2.
That's it.
Hang on a second, it's just trying to respond, sorry. It's not playing nice in the sandbox. It saw negative $2.2 million. Can you put that? Can you try?
I can try.
Share.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the screen. FY finance. We can go old school. I need the code.
You're there, right there.
So outside in, we've included this here because it relates to capital upgrades. You're good. Well, yeah, you're good. Thank you. As it relates to capital upgrades. So this isn't money going into Fund 2, but it's here because it relates to Fund 2. So you guys have heard us talk about end of year funds. We don't know that actual amount until late December when the county budget audit is complete. At the end of FY '23, there was $176,992 from our FY '23 budget that we returned to the county. That was the overage. That's the amount we didn't spend. We have talked with them, and there's been sort of a gentleman's agreement that that money could then be put back into capital work. What we're going to recommend to them when we talk with them is we're going to ask for that money back, and we're going to use it to purchase a school bus and a van. And car van, we'd like to get a van because we need to replace one that's aging out. So we'll see what the money can buy, what $50,000 can get us. But that would spend that money out, leaving a little bit for taxes and all that kind of stuff. But it would allow us at least to get one more new bus and a new car van. So we're going to make that recommendation. That's not a new cost to the county. That's just coming back the funds that were already allocated to us. We didn't initially spend them, and now we're asking them to spend them in this way.
Is that the long bus or the short bus?
That would be the 70, is it 60?
70?
I never get it. 71, 72 passenger.
Okay,
We have to special order our buses due to the size of our bus.
right.
I believe a typical is 77. I think ours is 71.
And that special order, did it cost us more in special order, doesn't it? Or not?
No, it just takes longer to get it because they're not sitting on a lot. They're not stock made. So
Yeah,
it takes
which-
longer.
Which has a problem with the timeline at which we commit our money, to obligate our funds.
This is a little bit easier when it's in this fund because it's in their sort of general, what's the name of it?
They're unassigned fund.
Thank you. Their unassigned fund balance, so that remains, but we'd like to ideally get it spent because we'd love to have a bus at the start of next school year.
Oh, yeah.
But don't know if that's possible.
This is the one with the cameras throughout.
Yeah, the
roof.
new ones have the cameras looking down across the,
Belts.
Right.
yes, thank you. So then the other one to look at is Fund 5, and that's the Nutritional Services Fund. So you can see here, this is just the state allocation. This doesn't include her federal allocations or anything like that. So right now, there has been a decrease in the state allocation for food services, a difference of $29,000. So as Mrs. Jeffrey's building her budget, she'll have that number for now reflected. I don't know what this, we don't have the calc tool yet for the House and the state budget, so that may change. But right now, that's the number based on the governor's proposed. There's a decrease of $29,000.
But that's based on 2816, correct?
That's based on, no, that's the 2880 number.
Okay.
The only slide that's based on the 2816 was the comparison of the House and the Senate. Everything else is 2880. Because it wasn't complicated enough.
Trying to keep track.
No, you're good. You're good. Okay, so this then is our local request. I didn't want to go to this slide. But again, I'm going to say don't panic because the decreases that you're seeing, the red, are due to those decreases in the federal pandemic funding and the state school construction money. So if you look at all of those funds together for our total budget, so this gives you the idea of where we are for the total budget. Last year, you can see that our adopted budget was $48 million, $48.2 million. This year, right now, based on the governor's projected, the 2880, we're sitting at $44.5 million, which is a decrease of about $3.7 million. And again, I'll say that reflects that loss in federal funds in Fund 1 and the loss of school construction funds in Fund 2. The true budget loss at this point is $29,000 for Fund 5 And just a reminder that this doesn't include any increase in Fund 1 from the locality. That's held flat. That's an $11 million contribution. So hopefully, again, will see some increase from them, and that'll bring that 44 million up.
So because this is a composite slide, does this slide have 280 and 216, or
This is 2880. This is
280?
2880.
So that one slide where he bends his budget on 2816 does not impact any of these numbers.
Not yet.
Okay.
What we're waiting on is the Department of Ed will produce the new calculation tool.
Mhm.
The Sechrist can then go in, she can adjust that enrollment number to the 2880, and then she'll give us all of these new numbers will be recalculated, and we'll be able to see.
Okay.
And so what she does for me is she puts it on, here's the governor's, here's the House, on all of those line items within the budget, and then we'll see what those totals are. So hopefully, maybe by the next board meeting, we'll have those calc tools and be able to give you those numbers and show them to you in a little bit more detail and align them with the 2880.
The only reason that we felt like we should show you that 2816 is because if we had used the governor's budget number at 2880, the House and the Senate were only at 2816.
Right.
So it was not really a fair comparison of those numbers.
Again, it's not apples to apples.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, we just thought it was
So-
better because it's good to see that increase because that's hope and that's positivity.
Sure.
Thank you.
It would have been really skewed then
Yeah.
because of the ADM not being reflected the same.
Right. Thanks.
Sure. So this slide, even though it looks bad with all the red, is the 2880. And again, we anticipate some of that to come. Any questions there? All right. So in terms of our local requests, so what are we going to go to the county with? And, the purpose of this proposed budget is for you to either say to me, yay or nay. We're not going to approve it or anything, but I just need your blessing to kind of move forward because we want to go have some of these similar conversations. We're going to go have those with Ms. Moeller and some of her staff. So what we're going to ask them is for based on the governor's request or governor's budget right now, we're going to ask for an additional $3.5 million in funding over last year's allocation. So take the 11 million, we're going to ask for 3.5 million, and that will cover those projected cost increases in Fund 1. So that's your compensation, the classified scale adjustments, and those additional costs, right? Then we take the state revenue that's there, you take that away from what our costs are, that's where you get that 3.5. And what we've shown you here too, we wanted to take this and show you if the House and the Senate, if either one of those were approved just as they are today, and again, those numbers are the 2816, that would change the request for the allocation to the locality. So if the House one came through, we would only ask for 2.5. If the Senate one came through, we'd ask for 2.1. Does that make sense?
You said, so those two numbers, the House and the Senate, are the 2816?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that'll be bigger.
They should go up,
Should be bigger.
which will make the requests that we're making to our locality lower.
And, generally they come back at some, happy medium in the middle. So it should be increased, but it'll probably be somewhere in the middle when we're all set.
Do we have any idea what the number might be at 2880? It's a guess. But I was wondering is there any value in projecting a?
No, and they'll even tell you right now, the state will tell you that none of these numbers are final.
Well,
Right.
right.
They'll say we just got a memo, what was it, the other day, yesterday, that this is all preliminary, do not base, do not set in stone your plan on this, and that it is all, nothing
But
is final.
even at this projection, we're still talking about $1 million
Oh,
reduction in our request, which is
Absolutely.
significant.
I would say you could look at, easily maybe another 300,000 to 500,000 maybe added potentially based on the enrollment increase. So add another 3 and then that would drop the request by that amount,
We're still looking at.
potentially. Yeah.
Depending on what it-
And that's above, that's north of the 11 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and the piece in the bottom is, I think, very important as well. With whatever requests we make for funding, we're also going to make a request respectfully that they remove the categorical funding that they put in place 2 years ago. Take that off so that we don't have that restriction as we move forward. So we'll make that request. It doesn't impact any money. It just impacts the work that has to be done with the money that we get out.
Right.
Or I shouldn't say we, she.
But
Ms.
that
Seacrest has to do.
categorical funding management only applies to their 13 million that we're going to get.
No, we
Entire
have
budget.
to, we have to request changes.
Because our entire budget, that Fund One, they even though it's state and federal money, they allocate it to us. So everything, and then all of our budgets within those categories.
All of our deposits, all of our revenue received is received by the county. Then the treasurer's office and myself work to allocate those funds into the correct categories, whether it's federal funding, Title I, or state all-in money, wherever it has to go. We work each month to make sure that all of the funding that they've received and that I show on a deposit report is in the correct categories and then allocated to the school division.
Now, is that only unique to this county? Because and the reason I say that is when we went to the meetings in Williamsburg, I distinctly remember hearing several people on stage saying that a board of supervisors could not control your dollars that come from state and federal.
They cannot line item appropriate. So they cannot say you have to use $50,000 in instructional money on this line for teachers at LES.
So it's a line item as opposed to category. Still, have a problem with that. I know we did. We all did. I'm going to revisit my notes.
So we're gonna propose that we're gonna request that.
I think that's good.
Fair.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's, me, it's an issue of, does the county trust the school board or not? And that's why we are elected, is to help manage the budget for the citizens of the county. They have their responsibility, we have ours. That's how I look at it.
And I think we're transparent and do a good job of managing our budget.
So,
Well, March 21st, we'll be presenting to the Board of Supervisors, so anybody who wants to come and hear, and in support of that presentation, we would love to have that support. But that's when we'll be presenting officially our budget to
What's the date again?
March 21st.
it's on my calendar.
And that's the same day we're at PCPS.
Right.
All right, so given that, all these numbers, big numbers throwing around, where are we? What are the next steps? So basically, here's 2 pieces to this. So additional information is going to come your way in March. We're going to give you that federal grant overview, so we'll talk about all those grants and what was purchased for those. And then there was a request from you all based on public comment at the hearing last week for some information on athletic funding. So we'll bring that to you. And then Ms. Seacrest and I are going to meet with county administration to review this budget request. We want to take our time and go through it with them and help them understand why we're making such a large request and why it's so important for things like the compensation increase to remain competitive across. And we'll do our short presentation to them on the 21st. And then we'll see where they go in terms, it might be that we ask their board and you all to get together and we talk through some things as well. So we may do that. And then with the state budget, as we get more information on that, we will continue to keep you posted and updated. So fingers crossed, continuing to hope that the good news will come from those amendments that are showing right now. In terms of timeline, March 9th is when that General Assembly session is scheduled to conclude. So feasibly, you'd like to think that we would have a approved budget from the governor by that time. Both the House and the Senate have to approve theirs and get it to him, and then he would have to do that. So March 9th is coming quickly, but that's the end of their initial session. If things aren't wrapped up by then, he'll have to call a special session. March 14th is our next meeting, and that's where you all will do your first sort of formal approval of a budget. It may end up looking exactly like what we've presented tonight. It might look different if we have some additional budget information from the state. And it's okay if it's not final, because you're not adopting it yet, and you can always make amendments as new information comes. So if there's anything different that we want to put in for next week, say something comes up and the next board meeting, we'll put that in there. We'll make sure you know that it's different. And then you will formally approve the budget on March 14th. On the 18th, the county administrator's proposed budget will be presented. So they'll do sort of what we're doing tonight. They'll publicly present their budget. March 21st, again, is when we'll go and we'll present in front of the Board of Supervisors. And then March 28th is our next March school board meeting, and that's right before spring break. So then come back in April, we have right now on the calendar, there's a proposed school board work session for the budget. And that's if something happens with the county or something with the state. We may or may not need that work session. We'll keep you posted on that. April 15th is when the, by law, they have to go and have theirs. The county will adopt their budget. And in their budget adoption is our budget request. So then we'll follow that up on May 9th is when you will do your final budget adoption. And again, last year we did that in May because we had to. We came back and we made some amendments to it in July, once we got final confirmation from the Board of Supervisors at what their funding increase was going to be for FY24. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Any questions about that? Okay. So that's our proposed budget for the coming school year. And again, we'll engage in conversations and wait for more information from the state.
I think you're meeting tomorrow with the county to talk about what we talked about at the roundtables. I think it's going to be a very important meeting for us because I think it's going to show that we're working with them, they call working friendly, and hopefully they'll maybe we'll find some efficiencies. I mean, Dr. Fox and I were talking yesterday. I think it was yesterday, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Okay,
Governor's
they
school, yes.
run together. But we were talking, wondering whether or not the Shenandoah insurance for their staff if there were, what kind of an insurance program they had, was it worth looking at? Because I know that the governor's school uses their insurance program because it's all combined because they're under Shenandoah County. But I think these efficiencies that they're trying to get to, I mean, we've got to continue to look at that, but it would be nice if we could find those efficiencies, as long as it's not eroding into our budget.
So, yeah, we'll keep you posted on those conversations as well,
Okay.
as they unfold. Are there other questions or information that you all think you need or want at this point so we can start gathering that for you? If there is, if you think of something when you go home or whatever over the weekend, just let us know. That way, as we come to the March meeting, we can be prepared before we come to you to ask for approval of the budget.
Yeah,
Very good.
Yeah.
Very
Good job.
good. Yes.
I have very good people who help you a lot, and I'm going to thank all of them too, because I put out multiple requests for information. And everybody was very quick to get information back so that we could answer questions, not only that you all may have had, but some of the board of supervisors. So I'll say thank you to you all as well, because this isn't an independent project by any means.
I think it's a good presentation.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's very good.
excellent presentation. It's better than good. It's well done.
Well, we're happy to have some numbers, even though some of them are red. We're just,
Right.
there's numbers on paper. We're optimistic that they won't be the numbers we end up with. And we're optimistic that we can engage in some really good conversations with the board of supervisors. So I'm hoping by the time, we start July 1, the next fiscal year, we'll be sitting in a good place.
Well, this, like the research that Dr. Johnson did, I think that was excellent to give us a picture of where we stand in the valley.
Yeah.
And I think that will help them understand why the increase of the 4% is so important. Yes.
And I think maybe even reminding him when you talk about that, what was his comment, that years back there were 400, 600 people at the job fairs and now there's like 120.
Right.
I mean, that's so when your selection pool is so small, if you can't attract them with a decent salary, you're not going to have schools.
When people are working in the county, they're also spending their money in the county and giving to businesses
Right.
in the county.
It impacts everything.
Yeah.
And those changes, I mean, I'll give you a real life example. It just happened to us this week, and it's disappointing, and I'll use the word devastating, even though it's not really a fair word to use, but we have an instructional aide who has left us because she found a job outside of education where she makes more money. So that's why those classified, it's a lot of money. They'll get us where we need to be, but it's critical to us to keep, because these are people that we want to keep. We want to keep the people that we have. We've just got to be more competitive. When you can go to an outside place and make more, in this day and age, people, their families and their livelihoods come first, and they're going to make, even though she, that person wants to stay with us, she can't do that and support her family. So unfortunately, she had to make that choice. We'd like to be at a place where she doesn't have to make that
Yeah.
choice.
Right.
Yes, I was just informed about that situation today, and she's exceptional with what she does, and that is a big loss. And these assistants are incredibly valuable, especially when we have teachers' positions that we can't fill. They are taking a lot of load to help. They're needed, and they're the schools that I have visited, I've been so just impressed at the teamwork and how the aides, they literally hop around all day long. They are helping to run our schools, and they're huge assets. We have got to do something in order to make them stay here. Our teachers need them desperately.
Well, this proposal puts them at 4th in the region, and on top of it, it would also put that salary increase. So that would be a huge boost for some of those folks in terms of their livelihood.
Maybe some of them will come back.
Hopefully.
Hope so.
I think the more you can communicate certain things, for example, talking to teachers not getting their planning time, so to take care of. You know what? That planning time is just a small amount of time. They're going home at night time. Maybe after they feed their family or whatever, they're working on weekends. They're working during the summer planning for the following year. I had a conversation the other evening. I was calling a friend, needed some information. It was 7 o'clock. I said, oh, I hope I'm not interrupting dinner. She said, I'm just leaving school. People don't know that. And in our office, when 5 o'clock comes, they go home. They don't have to do anything. People don't realize that. And, I've even had someone say, well, teachers, they get off June, July, and August. That's why they go into it. Well, you can't fight ignorance. But the bottom line is, we couldn't begin to pay for what they really deserve. But, we got to do what we got to do to keep them. But again, I just think we need to get more communication out there as what is the day of a school teacher or an administrator or a custodian, a school bus driver. Let's get it out there. And, the public forum, that would be a good place. I know we won't hit everybody, but, people don't have a clue. And I remember one special ed teacher many years ago, and she was an emotionally disturbed teacher. And I said, how do you do it? I mean, how do you keep from? She said, well, try not to take it home with me. But it doesn't work. Because you know what they're going through. And you carry that. Everybody carries that home with them. So I'm all about, talking to people, putting it out there, letting them know, however we need to get the communication. But spend the day with the teacher.
Got an idea for a project for one of our governor school students. Put together a video for YouTube, a day in the life of a Page County teacher. I mean, that's
That's an idea.
I mean, people they like their media. I mean, we're not getting the media, we're not getting the news out. The website is one thing. Our paper, I'll leave that alone. It just doesn't, it's not sufficient, but people will look at a video and they'll look at a YouTube video. And it might serve as a double research project for them. Just a thought.
There's lots of expectations legally for these professionals. And I think that sometimes parents, guardians don't understand that they actually have a standard and a process, and that's why things are happening the way that they're happening. And I think that that would be very nice to see. And I don't think that planning time, what I have come to learn, is very undervalued, and it's important. Right now, we don't have the staff in any school really to. I mean, there are some that I think can manipulate the times, but if they're short, they're rolling into a classroom, and so they've lost that time. And it's important. I liked that yesterday at the governor's school. I love how they were having the opportunity to plan together. That is teachers support with each other. They're collaborating. That rolls over into the classroom. That is helping our students. Yeah, in a perfect world, hopefully we can get to that point.
We have department meetings, don't we? I mean, in each
Grade level
school.
department,
Yeah.
grade level,
Yeah.
Maybe VSBA would be willing to fund a video like that. It actually could open it up to the entire state.
Yeah, they do a video contest every year, and they have a different theme to it, where kids can submit videos from different schools. So we could suggest a theme to them.
Or either we get our students to win the contest.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty sure if we put it out, we'd have some kids that would be more than willing to take this on. They love this kind of thing. And it's their thing, and they're just good at it, and it would be.
Our current
Our two
student.
representatives.
I think they, actually, she would do a good job. We get her to narrate it.
Sebastian really likes movies too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a movie nut.
He's a movie
Yeah.
guy.
Movie fan, I should say. He's a movie fan.
That's all we have. Would you all have anything else? What's on the agenda tonight? Short one for you.
Can I mention something about our student representatives? Is that appropriate now?
Sure.
To say, well, end of the year's coming, and Sebastian's a junior. And when we were at the VSBA conference in November, I went to a couple sessions with school board student members. And a lot of them now are getting a current sophomore and a current junior, so that when they move up, you've got experience, and then it keeps flowing. And I'd like to recommend that, and I'd like to keep Sebastian because he would be a great role model for whoever.
For June.
But be thinking about that, and I've got some information, I'll get it together and share. But, and he said, I'll go and talk to whoever and what have you, as far as students. But I think start with a 10th grader, and then they just automatically move up unless they don't want to, and then have a junior like he is right now, and then they move up. But you have some continuity there that works good. So just a thought.
Well, I'll throw this out at you then, since we're here, because it's March. So if that's something you want, we need to bring back the policy now, because you start
Okay, yes.
we do the applications in April, and you all do the interviews in May, and we have them named by June. So I'll
Okay.
bring you a proposal for
Okay.
policy adjustment, because we'll have to
Okay,
reword
great.
it. So essentially, instead of a 1-year term, we'll do a 2-year term, and they'll rotate, and Sebastian would start it off for us.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Okay.
And if they didn't want to do it that way, then we would replace or
Yeah,
whatever
we
we
could just
have
open up the
to.
application again.
But,
So how would that work if we had a sophomore? Would they stay on from their sophomore, junior, and senior? Would
well,
that
they're a
be-
sophomore now, they would apply
As a
as a
And-
junior,
okay, and then-
rising
as a
junior.
Okay.
And then
So
the
yeah.
junior
So it's
goes
rising
rising
junior,
senior.
rising
Okay.
Yeah,
Right now, it can be a junior or a senior. Essentially, we want them to start in their junior year.
yeah.
That continuity would be very strong. Yeah, I like it.
What a great experience
Oh,
for them.
sure.
And so, yeah. And there's another way you can maybe grow your own, because they may get interested, maybe I'd like to teach. Got to start somewhere. So that could possibly
Maybe
be.
they want to run for school board.
I was gonna say, maybe they would be.
I would love to see them, like, even whoever was willing to come with them,
Right.
and be like, instead of, I'm gonna, allot my time to another student to just kind of share about what's happening in their life. A student that may not be interested in coming to the meetings and having that opportunity, it gives us an opportunity to hear from our students and meet more of them too.
Or if we go to one of the schools for one of our meetings, open it up and let the representatives do a presentation to any students, like in Lueo Page, just have a meeting there. There's all sorts of things, but I really do think we need to get that in place.
Okay, I'll bring something back to you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion by Ms. Astor, second by Mr. Overbeck to adjourn.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.